You mentioned Aliou Cisse, and I would love to transition to Senegal if that's okay with you, because I saw the news that the FA decided to not extend Aliou Cisse's contract. And this is a man that took Senegal to two consecutive AFCON finals, obviously won the tournament in 2021. You will know well, lost the final in 2019 to Algeria, and reached the round of 16 at the last World Cup despite not having Sadio Mane. And I want to ask you personally, do you feel like it was the right decision from the FA to not extend Aliou Cisse?
Look, it sounds harsh because he was in charge of almost 100 matches with Senegal. I think it was something like 96 matches or something. I want to say he only lost, less than a dozen. I don't remember the exact statistics off the top of my head, but his overall record was very good. And as you mentioned, he started 2017 AFCON. They played the best football out of anybody in that AFCON, but they were eliminated in penalty shootouts to Cameroon, future champions. 2019, they lose to Algeria in the final, future champions. 2021, they win the whole thing. 2023, they lose to Cote d'Ivoire, future champions. So anytime that he's lost in an AFCON, it's to the eventual champions. And at the World Cup, as you mentioned, in 2022, he didn't really have Sadio Mane. 2018, I don't feel like they were ready just yet. It's too easy to look at his very impressive record and say they shouldn't have fired him. Because if you listen to Senegalese football fans and what they thought, they felt like the team was a little uninspiring. They felt like with the quality of players that he has, it's not that any coach could have done what he did, but it's expected to at least get the results that he did. And again, maybe they're spoiled, with their success, but you're talking about Kalidou Koulibaly, you're talking about, Pape Gueye, you're talking about Idrissa Gana Gueye, Sadio Mane, Edouard Mendy, a list of players, that's probably top 15 in the world. And when they were playing matches with Aliou Cisse, they were not scoring that many goals. They would win matches 1-0, 2-0, 3-1, and people felt like they should be winning these matches in a more convincing fashion. So Aliou Cisse was not in charge for this October window. They played a doubleheader against Malawi. His Senegal's interim manager, who was Aliou's assistant, Pape Thiaw, who has coached the youth national teams and the domestic national team, he won in his first match 4-0 or 4-1. Under Aliou Cisse's entire tenure, and again, remember, he coached almost 100 matches. They only scored 4 goals 3 times. Pape Thiaw did it in his first match. So that's the kind of, attacking football that Senegalese footballing fans wanted. And so I can understand sometimes, you want to change things. You feel like you don't want to wait for things to be stale and for things to turn rotten for you to make the change, because then you just end things on a bad note. I can understand it. The question is, again, who are they going to replace him with? Is it going to be this interim manager who won you 2 matches in October and who all the players know and like? Or is it going to be someone else? Wait and see.
It's funny you say that, because it was always a running joke on Netball TV with my co-hosts and I that Senegal were going to win every single game 1-0. 1-0 Sadio Mane penalty. That was just like
Exactly.
the
Exactly.
recipe, dude. Like every single AFCON group stage, man, it was like, when are these guys going to run up the score? So I understand that. But my response, and I'm not saying you have this belief, but my response is saying that, like, to the people who would argue anybody could have done it with this squad, I think that's complete BS. We both know nothing is guaranteed in football. Just because you have good players does not guarantee you to win anything. I mean, we'll see if Morocco can get something done at the next AFCON. That team is stacked. They haven't won. They have one AFCON all time. Ghana, you talked about the golden generation.
Yeah.
They made, they finished in the top four AFCONs in a row. Well, how many did they win? There we go. So I think
No.
Cisse, he did the bare minimum. He only won one AFCON. To me, that's a hater take.
What I would say is, especially at the beginning, when these were younger players, I remember Sadio Mane in 2017. I was at the AFCON in Gabon, and I was with, a British journalist, and the British journalists, they love to interview players that are playing in the Premier League. They don't care about, if you're playing for a local Senegalese club or something. So it's the mixed zone, and so the British journalists are all like crowding around him. And I remember the dictaphone was like this distance from his lips, and we're recording and we're asking him questions, and we couldn't really hear his response. But we say, okay, with the dictaphone or with the recording, we should be able to play back. It's right next to his lips, and we go back and we play it, and we're like passing the headphones around, like, are you making out what he's saying? Can you make out? He was so shy. Cisse, when he came in 2017, they did a great job of being that older brother, that older uncle. In the 2017 AFCON, when they lost to Cameroon, the match that I had referenced earlier, Sadio Mane missed the determining penalty when they lost, and he couldn't make it off the pitch. He was sobbing so much, he couldn't even walk. And Aliou Cisse was the man with his arm over his shoulder, walking him off the pitch. As a man manager, I don't think they could have done any better. And they absolutely needed somebody that could alleviate that kind of pressure, alleviate that kind of stress, give them a lot of confidence. Questions remain about tactics with Aliou Cisse. And that's, honestly, I think it's like a valid criticism. But then again, the counter argument is, are tactics that important at the international level? I don't know. It's a question that should be asked. But a lot of people say, tournaments, just play good defense, motivate your troops, and string together 0-0s or 1-0s and make it to the knockout stages, and anything can happen there. So, like, if you look at the World Cup, like how England easily scored against them on the counterattack, it was just very elementary defending. These are things that are blots on Cisse's record. record. But from a man management perspective, I don't think anybody could have done the job that he did, especially in those early years, 2017, 18, 19.
So you would say overall, on aggregate, Aliou Cisse, successful manager with
Oh,
Senegal this
everybody
last
would say
season.
that. That's unanimous, that
Okay.
his tenure was successful. The question is now, was it about to hit a downturn and we had to cut that, in the middle of it? Or is there somebody that can just be a little bit better? And they're looking for a Senegalese coach, by the way. They're not looking for a foreign coach. They're looking for a Senegalese coach that's going to be cheaper than him. So we're talking about $20,000 to $30,000 a month. And there are a few different candidates. Paptia, who I mentioned, is one of them. Omar Daf, who has experience coaching in the French second division, which is rare for an African. He played in the 2002 World Cup as a player, as a teammate of Aliou Cissé's. He has his coaching badges. He's another, I think, pretty convincing candidate. And the final one is Habib Bey, the former Marseille right back, who's been working as an analyst on television for Canal Plus Sport. So I think they're going to go with a Senegalese or a French Senegalese candidate. But again, are they going to do better than him? We'll see. Maybe Senegal is going to live to regret that decision they made. But they decided that it's time to take a gamble and see if we can do any better.
Would you say Aliou Cisse is a top 10 African coach of all time?
That's a good question, actually, because the BBC, they do match of the day podcasts like 2 years ago, and they rank top Africans of all time, the top 10 goal scorers, top 10 defenders, top 10, and they did coaches. And I was asked to help with the research and present them a long list. During that time, I started thinking, is this guy a top 10 coach of all time? I think he is. I think he is, really, because of his impressive record at the AFCON, because he won an AFCON, got to 2 FIFA World Cups. He's not top 5, but he's definitely top 10. I would have liked to see him just win one more AFCON, and he was close. But I don't think it's the end of him in Senegal. He's still young. I think eventually, 5, 10 years down the line, he's going to take charge of that team again. And if he manages to win another trophy, that's when we can start talking about him being in the conversation of best of all time. But for now, he's definitely in the top 10.
Oh yeah, that'd be crazy if he went to a different nation and won the AFCON again. Gosh, he'd have to be like minimum top 6 at that point if he gets a second trophy, like minimum.
Yeah, very few coaches have won it. I think only one has, no, two have won it 3 times. So CK Jamfi from Ghana, he won Ghana's first 3 AFCONs. Hassan Shahata won 3 in a row, 2006, 2008, 2010 for Egypt. But very few have only just won it 2 times. Hervé Renard, current coach of Saudi Arabian men's national team, he's the only one to win it with 2 different teams. He won it with Zambia in 2012 and then Cote d'Ivoire in 2015. So rare feats, but again, if he does that, that puts him in the conversation.
Closing the loop on Senegal, my understanding whenever I hear about them discussed is they're like an African power, but they haven't always been considered a tier 1. They're kind of like a tier 2. I don't know if that's population size. I don't know if that's just because they don't have the same historical players to the same gravitas level of a Nigeria or Ghana, which I think is tough to stack up against even Egypt. Do you think over the next decade, let's go that timeline, do you think Senegal will remain one of those kind of top 4 teams in Africa?
Yeah, it's a really astute observation. That's because Senegal didn't win anything until the 2021 AFCON. They didn't win an under 17 AFCON. They didn't win an under 20 AFCON. They didn't win under 23. They didn't win anything, anything, and no trophy at any level until 2021, which was played in 2022, but we call it the 2021 AFCON. As soon as they won it, by the way, they won under 17, under 20. They won the beach soccer AFCON. It was like the floodgates opened up. It's something that I think, sports psychologists could maybe use as a case study and examine how an entire nation were sort of liberated and they no longer had this inferiority complex. The amount of confidence that injected into regular people, everyday people. Senegal were all of a sudden the champions of everything. And so that's why they were always considered a tier 2 team. But nobody is producing talent on the continent like Senegal, except maybe Cote d'Ivoire, because the North African nations, they rely on their diaspora a lot, so they're not really producing those players. They're recruiting them. But Senegal and Cote d'Ivoire, the amount of talented players that they produce on a yearly basis is unparalleled. And that's why I think they'll continue to remain at the top. If you look at Senegal, they have this academy called Generation Foot. Sadio Mane, of course, came from there. Ismail Assar, current player for Crystal Palace, I believe. Pape Matar Sarr, Tottenham. Mohamed Lamine Camara, future superstar in world football, currently central midfielder at Monaco. He's from there as well. Generation Foot is an academy in Senegal. It's partially funded by FC Metz in France. And as a result, Metz gets right of first refusal. Any talent they want. One or two per year, they pick them. They go straight to Metz. They play in Metz for like 1 or 2 years and then they sell them for 30, 40 million. It's an incredible business model. If you're paying attention to Generation Foot, like some of these players that are coming up are even better than, like there's a kid named Amara Diouf. He's 16 years old. He's been the best under 18 talent in Africa for the last 2 years. And that's when he was 14. He's going to be at Metz as soon as he turns 18 and he's incredible. He's already played 6 or 7 matches with the senior national team. People are saying he's going to bypass Sadio Mane. I want to pull the reins a little bit and not exaggerate too much, but this is the kind of talent that Senegal's producing, and that's why I predict as long as they get their coaching decisions right, they'll definitely be a top tier 1 side for the next decade for sure. There's the Right to Dream Academy that I spoke about from Ghana as well. well. That's Kudus, Kamaldeen Suleiman, Ernest Nuamam. They did the same thing, but they go to Denmark, Nordsjælland. So they'll go play for 1 or 2 years over there, and boom. Simon Adingra also did the same thing. He went to go to the Right to Dream Academy in Ghana, and then he went to Nordsjælland, even though he's Ivorian. Then he went to Brighton eventually after that. So a lot of these European clubs are cluing in now, realizing that there's so much fertile ground for talent in Africa. And so as long as they can provide the right infrastructure in some of these countries, then they can reap massive, massive rewards.
Okay. Thanks for breaking that down. I wanted to get your thoughts on it because when I hear Senegal talked about now, it's like, oh, golden generation, kind of like an Ivory Coast or a Chile. Like, just wait, they're going to fall off now that Sadio Mane and Koulibaly are in Saudi Arabia. But it sounds like
No,
you're
no.
disagreeing with that.
Those were world-class players that they had. I don't know if you're going to have, 3, 4, 5 players that will hit those heights. There's players that have potential to hit those heights, but so far, like that new generation, they haven't hit those heights yet. But they'll have 11 very, very good players, even if they don't have like a player of Sadio Mane's ilk, because maybe that's a generational player once every 20, 30 years. But they'll have probably the best 11 of talent spread out when you consider all 11 players.